Good afternoon. We're going to call the regular meeting of the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority to order at 2:01 p.m. on July 22nd. Let the record show commissioners from Oregon, Fox, Babbitt, Olson, President, alternates Thomas is all here, and I don't see anyone. And Commissioner Edwards just walked in and I missed him. On the Washington side, we have Commissioners Anderson, Keithler, and is Doug online? Okay, our president, and we have alternate Gilchrist voting currently, and we have alternates Wilson and Berger present. Are there any modifications to the agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to move item number 10 up, just after public comment.
Okay, so item number 10 is the overview of the toll policy development process, and we have everyone online to provide that presentation. Okay, is there any other changes, modifications to the agenda? If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I so move.
Okay, there's a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. We have the minutes from July 8th, 2024.
I move to approve the minutes as presented.
Okay. There's a motion and a second to approve the minutes. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Public comment. Is there anybody online or in the room who would like to provide public comment? It's been a while. Not doing anything wrong, apparently. Okay, second chance for public comment. Right, we will close public comment. Hopefully, someone will call their friend to provide public comment next week, 2 weeks from now. Next up, we have the item number 10, which is the overview of the toll policy development process. Carrie Witt, take us away.
Thank you, chairs, members of the committee, or members of the board, I'm sorry, and audience members. And thank you very much for being willing to move this ahead on the agenda. There are a couple people here that are part of our funding and finance team who are in the Eastern time zone. And so we're doing them a favor by letting them have an evening. So I appreciate that. Amy, if you would be so kind as to load up our slide deck.
Yes, sir.
There it is. Hold on. Can you put it into presentation mode? Or, I mean, we can certainly do it in this mode. That doesn't bother me. Oh, there we go. Look at that. So what we want to do this afternoon is not actually ask you to get involved in making decisions and setting toll policy, but what we'd like to do is to walk you through a process that will result in a developed toll policy and toll rates in the late fall of this year. And that timing is consistent and is necessary for the work that we're doing on an investment grade traffic and revenue study and moving into applying for financing through TIFIA early in the year next year and into the middle of the year. And so, we heard you loud and clear. And when I say we've been working closely with the finance committee, but we heard the whole board loud and clear at your last meeting that this is an issue that you would really like to have be done as much as possible in front of the full board and with your input. And so, in the interest of that full transparency, we're here with this presentation today. Next slide, please, Amy. So just briefly, what kind of 4 main sections of the presentation, and then what I hope is a robust discussion that gives us some direction following this. But we want to, first of all, kind of review the lender and credit rating agency requirements. And this is all information that shouldn't be new to you, but it is an important reminder because it is really the credit rating agencies and the lenders who are putting the really strong guardrails around your autonomy to set whatever toll rates and whatever toll policies you want. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Then we're going to just very briefly overview the current toll policies and operational assumptions, things that we've already discussed that are already assumed in the the preliminary work that was done as part of the planning level traffic and revenue study that was conducted over the last year and a half, completed last July. And that was done in conjunction with the Bi-State Working Group. Many of you were members of the Bi-State Working Group, and so you've been involved in these discussions, and it's an opportunity to answer questions or clarify anything. Then we want to move into a discussion of possible exemptions and discounts. And I think this is the one that deserves some discussion on the part of the board. We're going to be talking today qualitatively, not quantitatively. There is some quantitative work to be done in the near future, but my hope is that we can have a discussion today that will give your finance team some direction with regard to what is really important to you and what direction you would like to have us go, because we really can't probably do everything that we might want to, or that any individual person might want to, and you'll see that when we get to it. And finally, an anticipated timeline and milestones that you can expect from your finance team over the next several months as we go forward. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Brad Gilmano from PFM Financial Advisors, your financial advisor, to just remind us of the kind of guardrails that the lenders and the credit rating agencies put on your rate setting process.
Yeah, appreciate it, Kerry. Hopefully this yellow light in this hotel room is not too distracting. A little odd, I'll just say. But yeah, we wanted to just make sure that everyone was aware of kind of the commitments that the board will eventually make inside of pursuing, a federal grant, or really any debt for that matter. Because the Bridge Authority only revenue source is toll revenues, right? The toll revenues have to be sufficient to pay for all the operations and maintenance, the life cycle needs of the project, and obviously also any debt service, that you will encounter. So, the rating agencies really are going to look at it hard. U.S. Department of Transportation with its federal TIFIA loan is going to look at this as well. And the traffic and revenue report really is the key factor in determining the amount of debt that we're able to secure based on your revenues. So when we went out to the rating agencies, we were able to get that investment grade rating from Kroll, and that was based on the traffic and revenue forecast that supported this $105 million loan. So if you were changing toll policies that would in effect reduce that revenue, that loan size would be in jeopardy, as well as that credit rating. So you're not committed until we actually sign up and we go through the detailed process, which we'll talk about what that looks like, but just wanted to set that up. And if you look at the next slide, just wanted to remind folks of the kind of the current toll rates. This is what was in effect in the traffic and revenue study. So what we owe CDM Smith, who's going to be your TNR consultant, is the final policies that are going to go into that traffic and revenue report. And that is what we are going to use to get the commitment for the actual security in the loan. So if you look at the passenger car rates and the trucks, it's advisable we kind of have to stay somewhat in this same category, right? 175 currently, as well as when we open the 225. And then inside of that, you're also going to commit to keeping those toll rates in place until at a time where maybe you could revisit it. And that's also what we wanted to talk about and set that up, is what does the timing of that look like? So next slide.
All those white gaps out there. Right. So look at how you've been out there with.
Hey Doug, I think
Can
you
we
got a
mute?
hot mic.
Can we mute Doug Gibson?
It's kind of crazy.
So I know there was a lot of talk about what can we do with
23 to 36 knots.
And are we able to maneuver them a little bit? So what I wanted to show
23 to
you,
36 knots.
Hey Doug, you're on hot mic.
Three dots up in the corner. On those.
Sorry, guys.
I think you have the ability to mute him or kick him off.
Hey Doug Gibson, you need to go on mute.
You need to do box account. That's what I'm.
There he goes.
Thank you.
All right, sorry.
so I wanted to put this slide on the graph back up just to kind of show you this is how right now our financial plan is utilizing the toll revenue that you're going to collect. So we have to make sure that we maintain the project. That's the operations and maintenance in the bottom. You see the TIFIA debt service supporting $105 million. And then what we have is your renewal and rehabilitation, right? This is the major maintenance needs of the bridge. And what I wanted to point out is in the first 10 years, there really isn't a lot of excess revenue. So there's not a lot of revenue that we could actually utilize to support other style programs. We were fairly aggressive on our debt service coverage ratio of 150 times. So when we're talking about, hey, how long can the toll rates, when can we start to maybe alleviate some of those big toll increases that we have every 5 years? The answer is really nothing for the first 10 years, because you can simply see we don't have a lot of room. In fact, in 2040, there's less than $1 million of excess revenue. So we really have to keep all of that. We have to do those toll increases until we get through around 2045, when then all of a sudden we start to have some more opportunities to look at things. And that's only if, you know, the revenue is performing kind of to forecast, or hopefully even above forecast. So I did want to make sure that we stressed inside of the financial plan for the first 10 years, we don't have a lot of room. In the out years, you have much more flexibility to maybe relax some of those increases, or we could look at other things inside of your financial plan. Also have to make sure your operations and maintenance, how the renewal and rehabilitation costs are stacking up against forecast. So if we go to the next slide. Just wanted to say, if I know there's policy considerations on what would a discount program look like. One thing I wanted to say is if you do some kind of a discount program, we're going to have to replace that revenue in some form or fashion. So that means other pieces of the revenue are going to have to be adjusted upwards, right? So maybe it's the video toll rate for folks that don't have the breeze by. Maybe that has to go up. Maybe what we charge trucks has to go up. So this is kind of the balance of how you're going to look at all your different classifications and the actual rates that we're going to look at. And then also TIFIA is going to try to take some of your excess revenue and require you to prepay some of that debt on an annual basis. That's something that we are going to work with you on and negotiate kind of on your behalf, but they are actually going to want potentially half of that excess revenue to prepay debt early. So we also have to consider that when we're looking at what those toll rates are going to support. On the next slide is a little timeline, right? So I think when we did the Facebook Live after that event, we talked a little bit about, hey, what commitments is the board going to have and what is the timing of those? So right now with the presentation we're giving today, you know, we're talking toll policy, right? So we have, you know, a preliminary one. At some point, you are going to adopt that formal toll policy. The critical pieces of that is going to be later this calendar year. So October to December, you are going to have to finalize that toll policy, because that is going to get baked into the traffic and revenue report. And that is going to be our base forecast. Once you have that and you commit to that, you're not going to be able to walk it back without impacting either your credit ratings or the size of that. The only other real chance to kind of move the toll policies around is if inside of the negotiations with either the final credit rating agencies or with USDOT directly, they might require additional conservatism inside of that forecast. In this case, you know, they might want to actually move rates up on you or lower the amount of debt. So, you know, we have a small window here, the board does, to kind of look at the final policies, and it really is over the balance of this calendar year. If you look at the ramp up section, once you become operational, you're in that ramp up phase, and really you're going to look at 3 years worth of consistent revenue performance. Once you have that under your belt, then we can start to look for a ratings upgrade. We can see if you have excess revenue that's above forecast. At this time frame, we could work with the board to see if there's any opportunity to adjust anything, or potentially to use some of that excess revenue for other purposes, which could be supporting something like a discount program. But like I said, when I showed you that graph earlier, the first 2 major toll increases in year 5 and year 10 pretty much have to be made exactly like forecast, because we simply don't have the excess revenue not to. So in 2045, the third increase, this is where you truly do have flexibility. You can start to look at that. You know, we work with your engineers. We'll look and see how your you're comparing to budget, see how the rating agents would take a look at what you're going to support here. So this is kind of the timeline that I see, which is because of the financing, right? If you weren't selling debt, then all of this would go away. You would have a lot more flexibility to ramp your tolls up and down as long as they could pay for operations and maintenance. But when you're locked into a financing, you are making certain commitments. And those commitments are going to be ironclad once you sign the loan agreement, which will be late next fall. But you're going to make that commitment inside of those negotiations late spring, early summer.
A question for you.
Yeah.
So when you say late fall, we're going to have to commit. Does that mean we have to commit on the 105? Or I know the rest of it, but what happens to us if we're qualifying for 105 million loan, but at the end of the day, we need something more like 50? Doesn't that change the profile?
Yeah. So two things would happen. One is your debt service coverage ratios would look a lot better because in that scenario, you're only issuing half the debt, right? So your debt service would be lower. So either A, you could keep making that revenue commitment, or you could then consider ratcheting something down as long as you're providing similar credit quality that we have today. So if in fact your debt service was half, yes, you could look at how the toll rates could be relaxed a little bit, or that might not work anyway. You might simply need to have that conservatism kind of built in. That way we would have to look at that. But when we're getting our final credit ratings next summer, whatever you commit to inside of there, you're going to have to stick with.
So the bottom line to help us is to keep the costs down on the project. This will have a direct impact on how much we have to get a loan for, and then how much we got to pay back. So pressure on keeping the project economically viable.
But there's a timeline on that too. That's probably before we know the real picture.
Well, to me, I think we try and qualify for the 105.
Yeah.
And don't spend it.
Right.
Yeah,
no, it makes sense. But we're going to have to commit to a tolling policy and a repayment before we really know.
Well, the good news, if we only need 50, if we kept the same curve on the back end, we just accelerate paying off the loan, and then we've got more money to play with.
We're under, it's easy. There's lots of choices.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about it a little in Carrie's part of the presentation here too. Is my recommendation would be you wouldn't change the traffic and revenue forecast. You would leave that with the toll policies that you're currently contemplating. But if you had excess revenue, you could potentially use some of those to support a forward-looking discount program. So if our debt service, say, was $1 million less than we have in our financial plan, you could take that $1 million and say, you know what, we're going to offer some kind of a discount program after we pay all of our waterfall, that commitments, then we could say, all right, we'll have this pool of money, a finite pool, right, to be able to utilize for other purposes. So that possibility would be out there if we didn't need the full amount of debt service that we have in our plan. So
let me just, one last piece of this. So let's say we're going for the 105. We lock in your profile that you've got there, and I forget what it says, but let's say in 2031, we're going up by 50 cents. And that meets the plan. There's nothing to say that we couldn't go up by 55 cents and throw that extra into a kitty for some kind of a discount program, right?
Correct. Yep.
The other thing that's two things that I heard from that conversation that are important. One is, Commissioner Fox, your scenario had us needing less money than the 105. That's fairly easy. It is much more difficult to think about what if we end up needing more money than the 105. We would have to kind of just rejigger the financial plan, and it might result in higher toll rates, et cetera. But our financial plans our traffic and revenue forecasting and studies are going to be based on the 105. Thing to remember is if you qualify for the 105 million, but you don't need the full 105 million, you only draw what you need and you only pay interest and payments on what you borrowed. So it actually kind of happens automatically that you would just draw less and your payments would be lower.
Right, it's a line of credit.
Kind of like that. Yeah, it's not revolving, but it is a line of credit.
Yeah, and there's no TIFIA prepayment penalty, right? So you could prepay as much as you want instantly, right? Or you could just simply not draw the whole thing down. So you have that flexibility. It is one of the nicer things about TIFIA.
So we should keep on buying those lottery tickets.
Yes.
That's it, exactly.
And in the authority's name.
So if there's no further discussion on this section, let's move into the next section. And here I just want to kind of remind you, and we've talked about a lot of this, at least we have it in detail with the Finance Committee, and just bring everybody kind of onto the same page that we're making at this early stage certain assumptions about toll policies. And first of all, I would point out that among toll agencies in the country, you are fortunate, and you're fortunate in that the Oregon and the Washington legislatures have both given your authority exclusive rate setting authority on this bridge. And what that means is that you don't have any political oversight from the legislatures or the governors of either of your states. You have complete autonomy in how you set tolls. Now, you're going to take on certain, and they will be contracts, you're going to take on certain agreements with regard to the borrowing that you do that will put some parameters around that. But for an agency to have completely independent rate setting authority is actually a very good place to be. So we start with the assumption that if the registered owner, and this is important, it's not the person driving the car, it's the registered owner of every vehicle crossing the bridge is immediately liable to pay the appropriate toll. Now, a sub-bullet there is that the board may determine, and you have sole discretion to do this, you may determine that certain persons or vehicles are exempt from tolls or are eligible for a discount. And that's going to be the third kind of topic of conversation here today. Basically, you are going to need to set rates to maintain sufficient revenues to cover maintenance and operating costs, financing obligations and covenants, capital repair and replacement reserves, and other needs that you may identify from time to time in that order. Also, that toll rates will be reviewed annually during the budget process to make sure that your toll rates are set such that you do generate sufficient revenue to meet all the operational costs and debt service obligations, and the tolls might need to be adjusted if there is some unforeseen circumstance. And that's just part of your budgeting process every year. Finally, all tolls, and this is federal law, because you have accepted federal money in the form of grants and a TIFIA loan, federal law dictates that all toll revenues collected on the new bridge must be used exclusively for bridge-related purposes, and that is in perpetuity. And you will be signing shortly a tolling agreement with the federal government to that effect.
Which is
I think
also
Commissioner Kiefler has her.
Yeah.
Hey, Carrie. I just had one question on that last bullet under the rate setting policies. I recalled our founding legislation in both Oregon and Washington being pretty specific that we were really only authority with oversight, and with that toll authority to have the funds go towards maintenance and operations or the capital repair and replacement. So I'm just wondering, do we even need that last bullet, or what was that intended to capture that's not captured in those other bullets?
That's intended just to remind you, and I know there's been some sensitivity around this, that the toll revenues collected on the bridge cannot be used for other things in the community. Yeah. And, I know in the past that's been a sensitivity with the Port of Hood River. And so
and I think that's why I'm bringing it forward. That sensitivity certainly is there. I think that last bullet under rate setting policies is necessary.
The other needs identified.
Sending a perception into the community as if we could follow that past practice and start to expand our oversight or need. I feel like the bullets, the other three capture pretty effectively all of the different ways in which we may need to raise that toll or have that toll to meet those specific needs about the bridge. So I think because of that sensitivity, I'm just leery of it being out there if we don't actually need it. I
Gotcha.
don't think we need the safety net.
And maybe we need to be more specific, or maybe we did get rid of it altogether. I can tell you what I was thinking when I put that in there was, for instance, the agency that I came from had an insurance reserve. That was, we decided to lower our limits of property and casualty insurance and instead build a reserve fund over time to allow us to every year lower the insured amount to save money on insurance. And so that became a other needs identified. It became a legitimate reserve fund. We had a fund for pension, for the pensions of our retiring employees, to make sure that the agency was able to fund its portion of the pension program. And we had a lot of employees, but those were kind of the other needs that were identified by the authority as time went on. Brad,
So,
you may have
Carrie?
examples of other types of things.
So Carrie, perhaps what you could do is change that to other bridge-related needs identified by the authority.
Yeah. When we looked at your flow of funds, we thought it might be beneficial to give you guys a bucket to do. It's got to be legal purposes, right? So your legislation would Carrie tell you it has to be for the bridge, but it could be reserve funds. When we show those cash flows, you had less than $1 million rolling around. So if something unforeseen happened, you wouldn't want to be required to fund some of these, right? But we wanted to give you the opportunity to say, you know what, we're going to fund a reserve fund up to 5 million, up to 10 million. If you wanted to look at discount programs or something, could you fund something in that bottom bucket? The reason we last in the cash flows is the rating agencies want to see that last, right? They want to see everybody get paid according to the schedule that we have. So if we did want to get a little, it's most likely what that bottom bucket would be is for reserve funds, just to take care of rainy days that might occur.
And one of the advantages to doing that is you establish a reserve fund, for instance, say an insurance reserve that covers your self-insured retention or something like that, or the types of funds Brad's talking about, is that then is not excess revenue. There is a claim on that revenue and it goes into a fund that the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority has determined is necessary. It is no longer excess revenue that is available to TIFIA who might want to take it back for early repayment of the loans. Excess revenue in general is not a double-edged sword. It's nice to have, but it's not nice to have because there's lots of people that have their hands out. And so one way to protect revenue beyond what you need for the first 3 bullets first 4 bullets is to establish reserve funds. And this gives you the flexibility to do that. And we'll talk about this more as time goes on. Maybe we want to be more specific, or maybe we want to be silent on that, and that's fine. Again, we're not finalizing toll policy here. These are very high level
And in
ideas.
terms of taking that excess revenue, that's a stated policy when we enter into a loan in the terms for a TIFIA loan, or you're bringing that forward as it's a likely scenario that we may find ourselves in where they'll want the excess revenue if we have excess revenue. Like, what are the stated terms?
I'm gonna let Brad answer that question.
So the stated terms are, you're going to collect your revenue, right? The first place it has to go is operations and maintenance. So it's going to go there first. Second, it's going to go to pay debt service. Third, it's going to pay for any reserves that we required inside of the financing. And then it's going to go to your renewal and rehabilitation, your major maintenance needs. And after that, it's silent. You'll have the opportunity to define what that looks like. You also don't have to fill it up at all. You could just leave it. But as long as it's at the bottom, the rating agencies aren't going to care as long as it's for a legal purpose. So you as a board are going to have flexibility to do whatever you want with that bottom bucket. That's
But
your
Brad, I
policy.
think the
But I guess
question
what
was,
I'm
though, are we
saying
going to
is-
agree to
Yeah.
pay back Tifia with any excess? Is that something we agreed to when we
Are we
signed the
gonna be
loan?
held to that? Exactly. Is that gonna be a criteria we have to acknowledge in signing, or is that an optional?
It's not going to be optional. They are going to demand it. So usually what we do is we try to negotiate down where, hey, maybe it's a 50-50 split. Maybe it's 75-25, meaning you keep 75, they're going to turbo out 25%. If you had other capital programs, right? If you were going to look at system expansion and all of that, in those cases, we can get Tifia to agree no prepayment. But in order to do that, you have to show other projects needs that money. Here, it's just a single bridge. You're not going to be able to win that argument. So we will try like heck to negotiate whatever terms you want, but they are going to usually ask for some kind of prepayment.
Yeah.
And then remember, once you start to prepay it, your debt service is going to fall, right? Each time you make one according to schedule, which will in turn make additional excess revenue. So if we are successful in producing excess revenues, right, and we're starting to do that prepayment, you're going to have a little more flexibility inside of your cash flows.
Yeah, I have a question about the first bullet. Is that a Tifia requirement, or is that based off the assumption that the board wants to go to a fully digital video collection system?
Hold on. You're talking about the registered owner. I mean, first of all, the way it works in both Washington and Oregon, and it's in the state vehicle code, is that registered owners are liable for the payment of tolls. And what that does is it relieves you of the responsibility of having to determine who was driving the vehicle. So anytime a vehicle crosses the bridge, the registered owner of that vehicle is liable to you for those tolls. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I think maybe the question's for the board. Are we set that we want to go fully digital and we're not going to consider toll person to collect cash collections? Because the way I did a little research, it looks like 25 to 30% of all of our revenue is non-breeze by. So how does that going to impact our users going fully digital?
Well, if we go fully digital, then it'll be off a video camera of the license plate, and then it gets charged back that way. It'll be at a higher rate.
This is a great segue to my next slide, if we can do
Well, I
that.
have
But I
a
see that.
hand
Okay,
raised.
yeah, Commissioner
So
Keithler.
specific to that point that Jake just raised, I've been under the assumption that all of the analysis to this point has still brought in the legacy programs that the current bridge operates under. So there are certain persons or vehicles that are currently exempt. So I'm leery about that statement there because it, in my mind, is not true to how we have been entering into this part of the project. We know that our tribal partners.
Let's continue this presentation and come back to that question, because you're right. First of all, I have taken the approach that this is a brand new agency, and if you want to continue things that have been done by the Port of Hood River, you need to adopt that policy yourself, right? So I have been taking the approach that we are starting with a clean slate. So one of your first orders of business might be to say, we're going to give the same exemptions and discounts to everybody who's currently receiving them. That is a decision you could make.
The credit rating we have and all of the analysis is based on the data we have, which means calculations are done factoring in those certain special users.
Correct.
So maintaining those policies is not a hindrance to any of our perceived status or position when it comes to the financing.
And you will see that reflected in our next discussion when we talk about discounts specifically. Let's talk though about toll operations. So the last one was kind of the broad overall toll policies. This next discussion kind of goes to how are we going to collect toll, and this is important with regard to the traffic and revenue projections. And I will say that the bi-state working group working on the planning level TNR study that was done, over the last 18 months, culminated last summer, did assume that the new bridge would have all electronic toll collection. So there would be no toll collectors in the booths. There would be no cash collected at the toll plaza, and that traffic would be free flow. There would be no gates and no opportunity to pay cash. We have assumed, at least for now, and certainly I hear that there may be a need for some discussion on this, that would be the case. So let me get all the way through maybe all the assumptions, then we can come back and say if there's any of these that you want to revisit. The second one is that just as it's done by the Port of Hood River on the existing bridge, that the base toll rate to be paid by any vehicle going across the bridge is determined by axle count. The third is that there will be two payment methods available. One is to pay your toll through a prepaid BreezeBuy account. And that BreezeBuy account can be funded by having a credit card on file. So you have a prepaid balance, and every time that prepaid balance gets down to a certain point, they hit your credit card and replenish that account, so that there's always a prepaid balance. There's always a positive balance in your account. Alternately, people who don't have credit cards, and this is, I would suggest this is necessary to deal with or to accommodate unbanked people who a certain portion of your population doesn't have access to credit cards, doesn't even have access to bank accounts. There is a method to establish this prepaid account and keep it replenished by cash. Exactly what the details of that will look like on the new bridge have not yet been determined, but my strong recommendation is that you consider having a cash option for people. So anybody who crosses the bridge who doesn't have a BreezeBuy tag on their car, we will take a picture of their license plate, and you, sorry, will send an invoice to the registered owner of that vehicle, and they will have a certain number of days to pay their toll via that invoice. You may want to consider an instant pay option. And that's where you say, we're not going to send the video invoice for 3 days. So if you go across the bridge and you don't have a BreezeBuy, you can go online within 3 days, give us your license plate number and your credit card number, and pay your toll, and we will never have to send you an invoice. Those have proven to be quite popular, and people do in fact use them quite a bit on facilities that offer the instant pay options. The next premise is that there will be not only a base toll rate determined by how many axles, but there will also be a toll rate differential between these two options that will reflect the risk and the cost. Having your tolls paid by a BreezeBuy is relatively risk-free for your agency. We know who you are because you have an account with us, and we already have your money. And so the only thing we have to get right is to read your tag correctly, and that's a 99.97% operation in modern toll systems, and that has not been an issue with your existing toll system. It certainly won't be an issue with your new toll system. Video invoicing is a little bit riskier because several things have to go right in order for you to collect toll. First of all, you have to get a good, clean photograph of the license plate. And that's why most facilities now take pictures of front and rear. It doubles their chances of getting a good image. Then you have to send that license plate to the DMV in the state where the plate originated and hope that that person has their current address on file with the DMV. Then you're going to mail them an invoice and hope that they pay that invoice. And so typically most agencies, and in your case, you have a cash rate and you have a BreezeBuy rate, that rate is double. Most agencies double their BreezeBuy or their electronic toll rate to cover the costs of their video invoices. The other thing that does is provides an incentive for people to go to the tag-based method because it's cheaper for them and it's better for you. And we'll get into, we're gonna get into presenting to you the quantitative aspects of this over the next month or so. We're going to show you what are the impacts of different pricing on these. A third one is interoperability is to be determined. I won't go into huge detail here, but slowly over time, agencies are becoming interoperable with one another. What that means is somebody who has a good to go tag in the state of Washington could go across your bridge and you could bill their good to go account for that toll. Likewise, anybody who has a breeze by could go across one of the bridges up in the Puget Sound area and they could bill your breeze by account for that toll. You will have to determine what toll rate you want to charge visiting electronic customers. You can do anything you want. I can say that a convention has developed on the West Coast, and this is different from the convention on the East Coast. A convention is developed on the West Coast that says, if you are a tag-based customer, you will pay the tag-based rate on any facility that you cross. Now, in the East Coast, they've decided that certain agencies say we will give people who have our toll tag a certain discount, but we're not going to give people from the neighboring state who have a tag from a different agency. And you'll have to just decide how you want to participate in that system. You will need violation procedures, fines, and fees. What about people who just don't pay? Oregon state law, and I believe Washington state law at least also, but I'm sure of Oregon, actually gives you the ability to put registration holds on vehicles where they can't register their vehicle until they have paid what they owe your agency. And that'll just need to be codified. And finally, and I've heard a good bit of discussion about this, you may wish to, and we've assumed it, but you may wish to adopt as policy right up front that bicycles, e-bikes, pedestrians, and mobility assisted devices are exempt from tolls. So I will stop there.
Yeah, Carrie, just briefly under the instant pay option for unbanked populations, can you expound a little bit for the rest of the board what that group has or what you've seen in other places regarding people going across the bridge have done regarding paying once they cross the bridge if they don't have a breeze by or similar thing regarding, like, for example, kiosks or other options that you've seen paying cash as an instant pay option?
So one is to have a payment window available at your agency where people who have crossed the bridge can pull off the bridge and say, well, I crossed your bridge just now and here's my license plate and here's $5. And you have a front window at your facility. That doesn't necessarily help people who cross at night, but they have 3 days for this to happen. Another very common way of doing it is to set up or is to subscribe to a kiosk service. There is a pretty significant portion of the population, probably more than 10%, who live life on a cash basis. And they pay their utility bills in cash, they pay their cell phone bills in cash, and there is a system of kiosks set up. There are several systems of kiosks set up where people can go into grocery stores, people can go into 7-Elevens, people can go into whatever, and there's a barcode on the invoice. They scan that barcode, they feed cash into the machine, and their bill gets paid that way. So, those are two options that I have been involved in helping set up. So those are the kinds of things we'll think about in the future. Now, there's a cost associated with that, and one of the decisions you'll have to make is, are we going to make the people that are paying cash for their transaction pay the cost, or are we, the agency, going to cover the cost of accommodating those people? And there are also agencies who make no provisions whatsoever for cash paying customers.
So I just wanted to bring that up for the rest of the board, that was an option, and it's a thing in concept that we can choose to do. It's just the operational aspects of how we do it to be determined, but it is a conceptual option.
Carrie, this is actually for your last slide, but it would be helpful if you listed for us what are the legal requirements that we're bound by. Some are in the CFA, others come in because we're taking money from the federal government. You simply cite those so that those are, so we have references to exactly what requirements we've already committed to or were required to commit to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There are very few that you've already committed to. And
Just having them all in one place.
yeah, that's great.
Shall we
So
move on?
I did hear the beginnings of a discussion on electronic toll collection.
Yeah, to continue that, I guess my question, was there analysis done of looking at electronic tolling and the cost to recoup and to process violations, all that versus having a staff tolling booth? Was that analysis ever done by anybody?
It was during the sketch level or during the planning level traffic and revenue study. We looked at the avoided cost that's associated with not employing toll collectors, and we also developed some costs that go into your operation and maintenance calculations, the cost of doing all that back office work that you were talking about, and compared them. And those will be part of the quantitative analysis that comes to you in the next over the next several months. But I think we can prepare a report of some kind that points all that out.
Just to kind of point here, on the current bridge, as you know, there's a tolling booth. History has shown that it's very difficult to attract toll takers. And frankly, about a year ago, we gave up trying to do the back shift. We just opened it up for basically electronic tolling. So if you have a breeze by, that's easy. If you don't have a breeze by, you run through, take a picture of the license plate, and then it takes days to hopefully get paid for that. But we gave up trying to maintain the toll booth on the back shift. And that's why I think if we can figure the right way to do it, and if we can figure through software, here are the types of people, or here are people that need a discount, and we can figure out how to do that, to me, make it as easy as possible and no toll takers.
I think Debbie, and I don't want to speak for Debbie, but I think Debbie would tell you that our experience, I keep saying our, see, I've already become part of your bridge, that your experience to date with that night shift has been pretty good. Your recovery of the tolls that are owed are actually pretty good.
Yeah. That's because a lot of people, there she is, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, so we already had the ability to do electronic, because we initially set that up because we had a problem with run-throughs, people that would just go through the breeze by lane but didn't have a breeze by tag. And so we just expanded that capability to be able to cover the night shift. And the thing about the people overnight is that they intend to pay. The people that run through during the day, the other experience we were having, they never intended to pay. But the people at night intend to pay. There just isn't anybody in the toll booth to pay. So our recovery for that has been much higher. And I actually don't have exact numbers, because of course people pay over time. And so they may not pay immediately. Sometimes they get the second notice. Sometimes they get fees applied, and eventually a lot of them, we do finally get paid for. So I'm working now with our back office company, P Square, to get some really good data, because a lot of people keep asking about that. And so I'm trying to get some really good data to be able to present to you. But I just did a quick look at our budget for next year, and we're estimating, even not because we don't have anybody there overnight, just to cover the shifts that we're expecting to cover for the next fiscal year, or the fiscal year that we're in this currently, it's going to be about $670,000 to operate that toll booth when you consider wages and benefits for the toll takers. So it's not cheap to have a toll booth there. And then of course there's maintenance and there's everything with the toll booth. But just staffing alone is going to be about $670,000 for this fiscal year that we're in right now, just for the toll takers, and then all the additional costs associated with payroll. So, but we'll have, and I can put together some better analysis for this for future discussions.
Can we move
And
on?
yep, let's move on. I'm going to take up your
Okay.
whole meeting as Mike predicted
Yeah.
I would. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about, nope, other direction. There
The
you
other
go.
way.
Let's talk a little bit. Whoop,
Sorry, my
stop.
clicker wasn't working. Sorry.
All right, let's talk a little bit about toll exemptions and discounts. And before we talk about specific discount programs, I think it's important to just talk about discounts and exemptions as a general proposition. There are a few considerations and things you need to be aware of, and these are common to any exemption or discount that you might offer. And some of these are really obvious, but I think they're worth just repeating. First of all is revenue reduction. Anytime you give a discount or you exempt someone from paying tolls, you reduce your revenue. And if you have multiple programs in place, that revenue reduction is additive. If 5% of your population qualifies for this discount and another 5% for this discount and 10% for that, all of a sudden you're giving a discount to 20% of your population. So they add up. Brad made this point earlier that revenue loss from discounts that you give to one population may need to be made up by increasing the toll rates on other populations. So that's something just to keep in mind as we go through this. Another area that's important that isn't considered or isn't as intuitive is administrative cost. There is a cost associated with verifying the eligibility of people, periodically updating the list of eligible people, and enforcement. How do you deal with people who game the system? And I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody anywhere, but people will game any system that you set up. And in my prior agency, we had several exemptions in place, and we did a big, very thorough audit of our toll exemption program and found a lot of dead people crossing our bridge. So there's the question of fairness and equity. Who qualifies for the discount, and more importantly, who doesn't? And what becomes really important there is, what is the cutoff point? If your discount is based on income, there's always going to be somebody who just doesn't quite make it, and it doesn't seem quite fair to them. How much of a discount is really meaningful to a population? And finally, in terms of frequency discounts, what constitutes frequent use? Is every day, twice a day, 4 times a day? And those are all policy decisions for you to make, but they have financial implications. Next slide, please. Another consideration that's common to all of them is uncertainty. It is difficult to predict what the impacts are going to be when you put these programs in place. You really don't know how many people are going to qualify and how many people are going to use the discounts. You also don't know, it's very difficult to predict the additive impact of multiple programs. And so what that does is that introduces uncertainty into your revenue projections, and rating agencies and lenders don't like uncertainty, and they're going to penalize you for that. Usually in the forms of just requiring higher debt service coverage ratios to ensure that that the debt service is going to be covered. Another interesting one that is not intuitive at all is that in an all electronic tolling environment, discounts and exemptions can be applied only to vehicles and not to individuals. So I'll use an example of my previous bridge. We had a disabled persons discount. And in the days of cash toll collection, people had an ID card that they would present to the toll collector, and that would allow them toll-free passage. With the advent of all electronic tolling, you would assign that discount to the car that person owned, but you really had no idea who was driving that car. And so if someone who was not the person to whom the discount applied was driving the car, they got the discount. And that, unfortunately, is really ripe for abuse, and we eventually did away with that discount program just based on that. I guess the one positive thing I would say is that, as Brad mentioned, there are alternate ways perhaps to fund discounts and exemptions that don't have an impact on your revenue stream. And what we've seen too, that I'm familiar with and have actually worked on, is the residual revenue that Brad talked about that comes later in your program. but also grants and other public or charitable sources. We're actually doing, I just spelled charitable wrong. I'm an engineer, but I can spell. We are working with an agency on the East Coast that has a charity that is underwriting the discounts that they're giving to low-income people in the community. So that's an interesting program. There are some administrative costs associated with it, but it doesn't impact their revenue. So let's go to the next slide. And I was asked specifically to just assemble a list of all the various types of discounts that I was familiar with and that I've worked on in my work in tolling. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and it's almost infinite what you could come up with. But the first three on this list are exemptions that are currently given on the existing Hood River Bridge. And that is emergency vehicles, local transit vehicles, and tribal members. And there are some nuances here. Emergency vehicles, is this all the time or only when they're responding to emergencies? Tribal members, is it any tribal member or is it just the 4 treaty tribes that we're working with? And I'm not asking you to necessarily make decisions today, but guidance is always helpful. And then the others are just a list of different discount programs that we've seen. California is big on alternative fuel vehicle discounts, senior citizens, active duty military, veterans. The next three, multi-trips, unlimited use, those are types of passes. In a frequent user program, all trips after a certain number are at a reduced rate. The frequent user discount is similar. There's the unlimited use pass, that unlimited crossings within a specified period of time for a fixed price. And then multi-trip packages where people can buy, 10 trips or 20 trips for a given cost. Low income discounts, essential workers, disabled citizens, and almost any other group, Boy Scouts, whatever. Low income is one that is getting a lot of attention these days. Very challenging, but it is being done by certain agencies in certain places. So I'm gonna stop there. I'm nearing the end of my presentation, much to Mike's delight. Thoughts?
Well, I like the senior citizen one myself.
So in terms
Sorry, am I
of
correct that a lot
direction-
of this focus and exercise today too is that the commission, we as the board could select up to 4 different additional discounts to run formulas on. And I'm saying additional to call out that we are already operating under the anticipation of those 3 that you have underlined. Those formulas exist. And so that's not an extra exercise that we'd be looking for the budget committee to run numbers on. Is that right?
I know Tim, our traffic and revenue person, is in the audience, and I'm going to ask Tim to comment on that. But there are certain of these that are baked in and certain ones that aren't. And I believe that the transit vehicles, emergency vehicles definitely are. And tribal members that are already getting discounts are by definition, I think, baked into the planning level work. Expanding that program would require some additional analysis.
So yes, the first 3 are already baked into the current modeling process. We do have, because of the way the commission conducted their study, we do have information and model structure to look at a low income discount. They also looked at a frequent user discount that was the unlimited use pass type. So we have data and process for that. We have data for multi-trip pass and frequent user. We don't have a process developed for that. Within the scope, I don't think that you want to try to do 4 additional alternatives because that would run the scope to 0. So we have been having some discussions when we've met with the committee about how this process could move forward, and we are looking to expand the scope to see how we could handle some of this at sort of the sketch level of forecast, using some of the tools we already have in place, and then narrow that down as you get towards what you're going to put through to the investment grade and then into the loan process. So we're still having those discussions about how that's structured. We don't currently have that in the scope. We're trying to figure out how that can work within what's been authorized. I hope that answers your question. I know that was kind of a long response.
Let me go to the next slide, because I
There
think what
is-
you'll see is a process for looking through these.
Hey, Carrie, just a minute.
yes.
You have a question.
It's actually just a comment. What Tim just said, he covered the things that I'm most interested in. So I'm wondering if he's already covered what the rest of the group is most interested in, then we're actually pretty good in terms of answering the question as to which things should be analyzed.
It would be huge if you were able to eliminate some of these from further consideration here today.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yes.
So where you are is top three, low income, and some kind of a frequent user.
Exactly. That's what I heard.
What's the third?
Unlimited pass,
Unlimited.
frequent and low income.
Well, some kind of a frequent user.
So two kind of frequent user passes, one of them like kind of a frequent user pass, the other one unlimited, and then low income is that.
That's a topic.
Can you clarify that, Tim? And is that just to kind of further clarify, do you have that data from the preliminary study that you could point us to kind of in summary fashion? Or is this, you have the data and it'd be easier to, analyze those
So the preliminary study report, the planning level study report that the commission did does contain information about the low income and the impact of that, and also an unlimited use pass, like what the pass was set to relative to the toll rates they selected, not the ones necessarily the ones you're looking at, and what the impact of that was. I think there's information in there on what the frequency of use is. We looked at using both information based on mobile anonymized mobile information from mobile devices, as well as some information that Debbie had available from P Square on the BreezeBuy users. And there are summaries of that in the report that you could have a look at.
And it's fairly typical for an agency to require anybody that's going to avail themselves of these discounts has to use a BreezeBuy pass in order to do that. And so we actually have some good frequency information. We know who our frequent users are, not necessarily by name, but by tag number. And we know how many trips, we can give you a histogram and show you how many trips constitutes frequent use. It's just a matter of now estimating, wherever we put that dividing line between frequent and infrequent, what's the revenue impact of that? And we could come back to you with some information on that. I mean, it sounds like we're really narrowing this down, and that is super, super helpful. So I'm hearing top three.
Marlon's going to jump in.
Go ahead.
Well, no, those top three, the variation in options column. So you're calling out there, do we still need to give clarification? Like currently the emergency vehicles, what is that policy? Are they allowing them all the time or only when responding to emergencies? Like, how are we supposed to interpret that final column?
I will give you there's a practical aspect to that. In all electronic tolling environment, you're not going to know whether that police car is going through on his way to lunch or whether he's going through chasing a suspect. And so my recommendation would be not to probably worry about that. Local transit vehicles, likewise, I would imagine they don't cross the vehicle very often or cross the bridge very often when they're not in revenue service. Tribal members, there is an important one with regard to tribal. Currently, only members of 4 specific groups, I believe I'm right, Mike, are entitled to toll-free passage, and there has been discussion about expanding that.
No, Carrie, it's all tribal members all over the country. It's all native tribes all over the country. The commissioners felt, I mean, we don't get that many other than, and even the treaty tribes here, it's not that many. But no, the commissioners felt it was more fair just
Okay.
to provide it to everybody. So that's what they did.
So if we
So-
maintain all of those same parameters, we stay at the base level. Nothing changes in terms of all the numbers and the modeling. So unless a commissioner or this board decides to stray from those existing policies of those three, maintaining those three programs has no effect on any of the analysis or calculations. Okay. And then the second part of all of this is for us as the board to identify up to 4, but definitely no more than 4 scenarios that are the additional options here listed if we want you to do further analysis on what those impacts could be if we were to consider one of those programs. Is that right?
I think you've got it.
Okay.
And let me go to the next slide and we can come back to this, but the next slide is really a look at the anticipated timeline and milestones. And so this really is a look at the process from here on out. What we anticipate is between now and September, we are going to probably have numerous more discussions. We definitely going to have numerous more discussions with the finance committee and probably with the board on all of this as we solidify. We're going to, by September, be ready to do as you just selected, or as you just announced, Commissioner Keithler, select initial scenarios for sketch level analysis. During the month of October, we'll actually do that initial analysis and bring back to you the high level results. And that is really kind of a no-go decision. This one just doesn't make sense financially for you. This one might make sense. Then we get an opportunity in October to refine it and say, these are the 1 or 2 that we want to focus on. We'll then go back in the month of November and do detailed modeling on those refined scenarios, coming back to you in December with the expectation that you will then be ready to adopt final toll policies, final toll rates, and tell your traffic and revenue team, go run this final scenario through the modeling that you've developed, coming back in January with the results of that modeling, making any what I hope at that time are really minor adjustments to that final scenario. And then you would have an investment grade traffic and revenue study draft available in February, finalize that in March, and that will put us in really good shape to then move into the TIFIA application process.
Sound good to everyone?
I just think that we could simplify it now, but
Let's do.
You know, it sounds
Yeah,
like we're already
I
got
would be
1 or 2
supportive of that.
Please do.
Can we go back one slide? Thank you. So
if I could-
top 3 are given, right? We're done discussing that.
Yeah, Carrie, can I make a couple of comments? Because I'm just from a theoretical point of view, I just want to see if we're on the same basis. The first thing I think about is the fact that what we're talking about is a payment that's of a relatively small amount. We're not talking about someone's mortgage payment. We're not talking about medical bills. So we're talking about things that are relatively small amounts. So that kind of changes how I think about some things. Another thing that I think about is that some of these groups are very broad groups, and they are presumed to stand in for income limitations or lack of ability to pay. But what we know from statistical analysis is that they generally don't. Like, for example, senior citizens, we know that in our community, the most limited incomes and the highest poverty rates are in younger ages, not in higher ages. So we can put in place policies like that, but they're not going to have, we may feel good about them, but they're not going to have the effect that we think they are. Things like alternative fuel vehicles make a lot more sense, I think, at a federal level or at a state level where they're trying to make policy, where they're trying to have a policy impact. We're not responsible for that sort of policy, so we don't really have an ability to think about that or to consider that. So I really come down to myself looking at is there a valid justification for people who are using the bridge more, not having to pay quite as much for each incremental use? I'd like to see some variations on that. And I really like the idea of us establishing a fund where we put in as much money as we can, and we use that to offset tolls for people who clearly can't afford to pay those tolls. And that's the sort of thing I'd like to see analysis of. So that's how I look at it.
The one comment on the tribal members, and it's not going to make a difference one way or another, but philosophically, we're negotiating 4 treaty tribes MOAs to be able to, get access to the water. The 4 treaty tribes, all of them right now get this exemption. It helps us in the negotiation that we keep it going.
I'm talking in addition to
No, I understand that. Where I'm going is, according to Debbie, all the other tribes have free access. Frankly, I think the numbers that we're talking about there are probably extremely small. But I can tell you, the 4 treaty tribes, if they really understood that, they would probably not be real happy. They think this is their bridge in their area.
And that came from your board.
Yeah, that's right. But we're setting our own policy.
Right, no, I get that. Yep.
Yeah. And we're trying to get these treaty tribe negotiations done too.
Sure. So I mean, my personal opinion, what Arthur is saying makes a lot of sense to me. And the low income is, how do you do that where a bridge toll is having an outsized impact on those people's lives that have a low income is kind of my primary one. The frequent user, the unlimited use pass, every vehicle that goes across that bridge creates a usage on the bridge, and that creates future maintenance. So that seems a little less to me, because I think most of the frequent users are going to be businesses that are using the bridge and generating a profit for that, and I'm less sensitive to that, I guess. But other than that, I think I'm pretty much in alignment with your thinking.
And I think tell you, so Mayor Keithler may be able to jump in on this too, but I know that, for example, the city has a program to help people deal with paying their city utility bills who can't afford to do it. It's administered through Mid-Columbia Community Action Council. So we have a local organization that does the means testing, and they handle the paperwork and they administer that program. Marla, is that how does White Salmon do that?
For our water rate discount, we expanded it to all low-income households, and we work in partnership with WAGAP for the vetting. But similarly, they pay a reduced rate. We already did analysis on different thresholds depending on how many people we could foresee using that program, and then had our council sign off on that projected loss of revenue by losing some of those full rate payers.
Like using some sort of system that's already in place.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
That's
Would
different.
highly recommend that. We don't want to create our own vetting system.
And that's different with a system that's already in place and taken care of versus creating something from scratch, from nothing, which we have to acquire a massive amount of debt in order to pay for, which we will be obligated to pay back. And then over time, if we're able to use funds from tolls to pay that debt off in a more expeditious manner, in the future, we could suppress future tolls for a broader base of people if we should choose to do that as a toll policy.
So suggestion, we're supposed to be coming back in September with the first draft of these rough models. Why don't we say in September, part of that deliverable would be, what could you put in place for a frequent flyer card? And what would you put in place for an low income? And more importantly, how do you set it up? How is it going to work? What's the parameters? Not so much the dollar value, but how are you going to manage it?
So until we have sketched out some information, some data, until we see sketch level data, it's hard to say what should a frequent flyer thing look like. But they have the numbers, but we haven't seen the numbers yet of, if you, 20 trips a month, 50 trips a month, 100 trips a month, how many people qualify under each of those. So are you suggesting that
I
we
see
should
that.
be doing?
Yeah, I would like to see how many of those do we really have? You know, how many people would we really be helping by giving a discount? And then what's the knock-on effect on loss of revenue?
Like, that's what we need to see.
Yeah, I
in
had
order
my-
to
Yep,
make
and
that
you're
policy.
going to, you're
I had
going
my
to
hand
see that.
raised, not to answer that initial question. I had it before just on this topic of frequent users. So I guess to jump in a little bit here. I think to some points that were made earlier, I'm certainly supportive and will be vocal to push that we do a formula and calculation around what a frequent user program looks like, because I think for everyone's historical memory here, this is something the community has been asking about since we did that initial toll and revenue study when we were still a bi-state working group. So I think we owe it to the community to do the exercise. What I would be curious in, and maybe this is where some of the conversation was going in terms of what is that ceiling we're setting. To me, it's giving Tim and that team direction of, do we want us, I would be thinking about it in ways of what is the top 2% highest users or top 5%, but give them a number to work with. So then they can pull that data and run the analysis. If we were to catch the 5% of users means they're making 80 or more round trips a month or whatever that threshold is, and then could understand what that impact is on the overall revenue. To the point about who that's benefiting, I think that is benefiting a lot of the working class. And this touches on a lot of areas. And I'll speak as an employer, but also as a mayor for our community. We have lost employees, have moved across the river. And I know that is the case. We heard it from many of our Washington state employers with the bridge closure, percentages of how many of their workforce is using that bridge to commute. And it's easily a third, I think, for many of our local businesses. So that's 2 round trips on a shift day. Childcare, it is a known desert in Clickitat County. I'm one of those families. There's another 2 round trips a day to get my children over to where they need to be taken care of. So I think a lot of our frequent users are actually our everyday users, not our private business owners, or a comment that was made earlier about who that's benefiting when you think about that discount. I do think, though, that we need to be isolating those highest tier users to see that benefit. And that's where I think some numbers would finally be helpful to inform like what that impact really would be. And maybe then we're wanting to look at a couple different ones. Is it the top 2 and the top 10 or top 5 and top 10? But that's kind of where my head goes on thinking about what I'm hoping we can leave this meeting with in terms of like the meat that the rest of the team needs to actually give us some real numbers to evaluate in September.
Adding on to that, if I can, I'd like to also see us look at seasonality and look at the users that are, what it would look like to do, an annual pass or pay at an annual rate versus a monthly pass. Since we do have a lot of tourism this year. And, it's a very common methodology that's used for all kinds of services you pay, a subscription fee for. There's a, further discount if you pay either all up front or commit to doing a full year. Yeah. I don't know how big that is, but it might be worth looking at.
So Carrie, what I'm hearing here, before your September coming back with the results of the model, it would be helpful if you could give us raw data, cut a couple of different ways. In August, we take a look at it, we could probably simplify down the number of models you really run for September.
Yes. No, I'm hearing strongly, and I want to make sure that I'm right, because Tim is taking direction based on this. So the first 3 we're going to do: emergency vehicles, local transit vehicles, tribal members. Then we're going to look at low income, and there's a number of ways to slice and dice that. And quite frankly, if there's an interest, this is something we do around the country a lot, and we can talk about the different ways that some people are implementing it. I do like the idea of using vetting programs and credentialing programs that are already in place. So for instance, if you qualify for aid to families with dependent children or whatever, your income has already been vetted by some other social service agency.
Before you go to the next one, what I would ask the local communities then, if you know of a program already and how they're doing it,
Yeah.
Can you just send those programs to us so we know
Well, it's,
who's
I
already
can
doing
have,
it? 'Cause
I can
think
have
that'll
someone
be
come and
helpful.
present. I can have someone come and present on those programs for
Well,
you.
what
It's
I'd
not
like
just
to
like
do,
send the
Carrie,
program.
I think
I'm
you're-
doing it in the reverse, Carrie. I'd rather, they already have ones that are here locally. They
Oh,
know what the ones they're using. I'd rather them just tell you guys, here's potential places.
Oh, I see
that
what you're
we could
saying.
get it.
Yes, yes, yes. Well,
Because
Mayor
if they're
Keesler,
already doing them for
Mayor
certain
Keesler
areas.
mentioned one that they are already
Yeah,
using.
but if you could just email those to us, then we'll get that list
Yep.
started of
Yep. That
potential
makes
ways we
sense.
can do it.
So
You
specifically,
use one for your utility program, right?
Yeah.
A vetting.
specifically, I'd like to ask Grant to pass along how the city of the River does it. Marla can pass along how the city of White Salmon does.
Do the county name.
Yeah.
And we got the, I don't think has a program,
Okay.
but because we don't have any utility bills. And hopefully Catherine or someone like that can get us for Bingen how they do it. So if I could, just one more item. So philosophically, the issue of multi-use or frequent user discounts is the idea of separating a base cost from an iterative cost. And you think about like a water system, whether or not you're using any water, there's a cost of having all the pipes there. So ideally we would have a base rate, just like water systems have a base rate. We don't have the option of doing that. But if you're crossing the bridge once, it means there's some value to you of having a bridge available. Whereas then when you start using it, if you're using it 5 times a day, I looked at my calendar, I'm using it 4 times on Wednesday. So if you're using it multiple times a day, then you've already paid for the cost of it being there. And it's more that we're looking to get you to pay for the wear and tear of your actual usage for it. So there's a good philosophical basis for a frequent user program. It's not ideal because it's hard to separate those two concepts out.
Which I think one thing we're all forgetting is that the frequent user discount is already baked in, and that is the breeze bypass. Remember before the breeze bypass, we had the little tickets, and that was your frequent user. You'd buy a book of tickets and you get 25 cents off, and that was when the breeze buy was instituted. That it's the same thing. We already have been using the frequent user discount. Most of the people who come from the summer or come for a night or whatever, they're not going to sign up for a breeze buy for one night.
I don't know that's true. I would check with Debbie on that, but I mean, I had Breeze Buy for a couple of years that I almost never used. There's no cost to setting up the Breeze Buy, so I think people do.
There is a cost to setting up.
You just have the deposit of money, but it's no actual cost.
Yeah, it's still $5. Yeah, you still got the cost for the.
It's free for the first vehicle.
My Canadian relatives have a breeze by.
Well, I think what's exciting is we all are agreeing that we should have some sort of discount program, right? We all agree there's a need. And I also think that we're all on the same page that if we give discounts early, we're potentially hurting ourselves later in the time. So I think by going forward and doing what Arthur's been proposing, I mean, we're all on the same page. It looks and feels that way, that we're all ready to move forward and get this going.
Do we want this quantitative analysis to include a revenue neutrality for the rest of this discount?
Does it have to? I don't think there's any choice.
How would
Based on what they've
Yes.
already been saying, you're going to have to raise the rate on everybody else if you get provided a discount somewhere else.
But we're going to discover it's going to
Well,
be
I have a
relatively
question
small
there
amount.
on raising the rate. So we also made conscious decisions the last time when we were considering the increase that's currently in place of not raising certain vehicles at all and making passenger vehicles really carry the burden of this increase. And so as we are thinking about considering some of these programs that are going to benefit that everyday user, why can we not revisit the formulas and see some of that offset happen in some of these larger vehicles or different users that are not the passenger vehicle? Why does it have to be the passenger vehicles that have to be carrying either the burden of a future discount or foregoing a discount and carrying more solely the burden of any increase?
Hey, Tim, how complicated would that make your analysis?
Figure out the best way to answer that short and clear. So part of what most toll authorities do look at is their classification systems, and they do consider raising tolls for other classes more or less, depending on where they as a policymaking body, decide that that should be applied. So for instance, earlier we mentioned that you don't necessarily have to give interoperable transponders the same rate. So you could shift some burden that way by saying, we're going to have a rate for interoperable transponders that's higher than the breeze-by rate. There's also the possibility of shifting some of it to commercial vehicles. However, keep in mind your commercial vehicle share is pretty low on the bridge. So I'm not sure how much benefit you're going to get from that. It's a small percentage of traffic. It's a larger percentage of revenue, obviously, because the toll rates are higher. Those are some of the traditional things that toll policy making authority would be looking at, and that's some of the things we're usually set up to test. So yes, we can test those also, and we'll, if Carrie, maybe we should add that to the list of things to bring back in September to have additional discussion on.
Absolutely. And there's also a possibility we will be back for some minor checkpoints between now and September. I want to say, if there's some question about should we go this direction or that direction, would like to reserve the possibility that we would be back to you before September. But I think looking at the entire toll rate schedule is worthwhile. You'll recall that the decision that was made was not to raise truck toll rates the same amount that you are raising passenger toll rates. And just looking at your toll rate schedule, and this is an editorial opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway, trucks get a pretty good deal on your bridge. And that's, and that's fine as a matter of policy, but it's as compared to other toll agencies and their truck toll rates, trucks do pretty well, but there aren't very many of them.
So Tim, do we know in our current system, how many non-system passes pass through? I know the transponder reads other passes, right? Even though we don't bill them. Do we know how many, people from different parts of the country with toll passes pass through our system?
I don't think we did that for the commission study. I know that we're going to ask for information like that.
I think we could get that.
Debbie's looking at it. Yeah, so Debbie will have to ask P Square what they have available.
Right. We actually need to do some upgrades to our equipment to actually track that information. WashDOT was able to give me, and I would have to look it up. They were able to give me the information on breeze-by transponders that go through their system, but we don't currently have the data on other transponders that come through our system. And yeah, we can get that information. I mean, it's not that difficult to do, but P Square is working right now on determining what we have to upgrade in order to be able to track that accurately.
Thank you.
I guess from a policy perspective, is that something that we want to spend time, effort, money on, is looking at the other passes like the good to go pass or something else and charging that at a different rate and investigating that?
Only if it's a meaningful number.
I mean, I'm looking at it more of a policy perspective. If we're getting $125 million from the state, I think the state's gonna say, we're paying our portion. And if we ever want to give this bridge to the state, we're gonna be wanting to keep parity, because we don't want to start the tit for tat, and then they say, well, then we're charging you more.
Right, but you're talking about Washington permits, great, okay, so that's fine, but what about people coming from New York?
Or Oregon.
Or Oregon, right?
We currently are nowhere near having interoperability agreements with those states, and so that's probably a moot point at this moment.
Right.
Is there a potential, or has there been consideration that up until this point, you will be maintaining the current tolling rate? And if you get a breeze by after January 1st, 2025, that you would get increased? I mean, that way we have kept the commitments then to the community members that you said they would not be increasing their toll rates, and then anyone future, they would be moving up, or is that even worse? So you have an old breeze by, you have your old, after this fee number,
grace period.
you've got your godfathered into this potential rate, and then, because Mayor Keebler did bring up that the commitment has been made to the current people, we're not gonna try to increase your bridge rates. Well, if you have that group of people up until this date, and then you move here, I guess this is for Debbie, do we have a lot of new accounts that come in every month, or is the community kind of saturated with the breeze? I guess that's my.
We're pretty saturated. We did a huge push. Yeah, we did a huge push for September increase, and really reached out to like the Latino community and things like that to really make sure that we're reaching everybody. And so I think that we're pretty saturated. There's not going to be a lot of new ones on a regular basis.
And I don't think that legally you can do that.
So Carrie, one thought I've got is whatever savings we generate from the low income or reduction in revenue from low income and the multi-use, whatever that is, what would we have to raise the business trucks to recover that? And I think my gut feel is it's not going to be huge, because I think the numbers we're talking about are bigger than small, but not real large.
Where you put the line, what's low income
Yeah.
starting?
We can look for it. Yes, it's almost infinite. What is the cutoff point for low income? What is the cutoff point for frequent user?
But I think that ought to be a goal to still come out revenue neutral after the change. What would we have to do to lower this down, raise that up? What's the net of, what's the effect on the business?
Do we have a cutoff line for low income that we want to analyze?
I would say.
Let us get back to you.
Yeah.
I'd like it to be the same as some of the other programs.
Yeah, I would say we follow the eligibility level for some of the other agency programs.
So you use their policy data.
Okay, it is 3:30. Is there any final discussions to be had before we actually do some business?
Oh.
Thanks.
You're welcome. That was what you said.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you all for your attention to this. We did make progress today.
We have a four.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. So we don't have a whole lot.
Let's start cruising through this. Co-chair.
Yeah, real quick, we opened the bridge about 2 days early from the accident. We opened it Saturday morning, somewhere around 8 o'clock. I lost track. And I want to thank Kiewit and the contractor for the bridge for the port was HDR. They did a fantastic job along with the port maintenance folks. I was out there 4 or 5 nights in the middle of the night watching things going on. And I'll tell you, they busted their tails getting the bridge put back together with the duct tape and the bubble gum.
I looked at it, it's not duct tape, it's actual steel. It's check.
And bolts. And bolts.
Okay,
That's all I got.
that's up. All right, next up, project director update.
We do now have Salmon Safe under contract. They will start participating in the technical reports and meetings and also working with us on some funding elements. So it's good to get them under contract. We did hear back on the bridge investment program. We were not successful on that grant. However, because we were highly recommended, we automatically roll into this year. So we're looking at potential some updates and trying to understand when we can do updates to that grant. So we will resubmit ourselves for that. I did talk to FHWA today on the RAISE grant. It looks like we're still about probably 6 weeks from getting the RAISE grant signed. There's a couple more layers of headquarters in DC that has to go through to get that approved. And then we're also continuing to work through the infra grant agreement. I think ask WashDOT on their additional 10 million. That is in their headquarters, finishing up the review at their headquarters, and then it'll go to their legal. So we anticipate in a couple of weeks, maybe a month, we'll get that Washington grant finished up. So we're currently working off the 5 million, but that would increase it to the 10 million to the total 15 million. I think that was all the hot points I had. Yeah, that's all I have.
Any questions on any of that? Okay. Partner updates. Do you have anyone from Federal Highways, ODOT, WashDOT, stakeholders that would like to give us any updates? As quiet as public comment. All right, consent agenda. Entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I would make that motion.
Second.
There's a motion and second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries. Also, for the record, we had Doug online. I can't tell if he's online again. I'd let the record show Doug did sign in.
Oh, Debbie sent, oh, that's not, that's the cursor, never mind.
All right, moving on, engineering and construction.
Yeah, very, very quickly, we had a meeting this, actually yesterday, I think it was. No,
No,
last week. Couple of the key things, we went through the 3-week schedule, but we really focused on a discussion on the NEPA process. And because we are modifying the approach to the bridge as far as going from concrete to steel, that's causing some concern from ODOT, Federal Highways. Personally, I think there's a little overreaction, but I think we're very quickly getting them back into where they're okay with it. But it has delayed us moving forward with 106F. It's also impacted the MOAs with the treaty tribes. But I think with the revised description of the project that Kiewit and HNTB has done, I think we're getting ourselves back on track again.
Yeah. We ended up meeting with Umatilla last week. So the 3D MOA meeting seemed to be continuing.
Happening.
Yeah, so I think we're back on schedule with that. So.
Do we feel it's important to get some acknowledgement that we're back on track, or they were kind of?
HWA made it very clear that the ball's in their court and that they would come and make it sure, but having the meetings on the schedule has been very beneficial. And I think the rendering was really the selling point. So thank you to whoever did the rendering, showing that steel and concrete just a different.
So other than the color of the steel, you couldn't see a difference. So that's good.
Just waiting for you to paint the steel in that rendering.
And that's the big issues. There's a bunch of others, but because of time.
Okay.
Keep going.
Communications.
Hi, guys. Similar to Mike, in the interest of time, I'll keep this hopefully focused. On the government relations side, the board authorized Mike to move forward with contracting someone to bring in to help on the government relations kind of coordination internally. And we're hoping to start some meetings this week. And the goal there is to really get more structure and organization on our side of things in terms of Mike's team and what the commissioners are looking to see in that strategic government relations plan. So hoping that by August, we're ready to come back to the full board with what a strategy is looking like into the fall and winter and leading up into 25. And again, the focus there is really a little bit more heavily on the organ side, just knowing that it's very important that we're successful, ideally in 25 with the funding that we need to see there. We're also, I know it was mentioned earlier, but we're working both with the JLA team over in public involvement and our government relations partners, specifically Thorn Run, and kind of, as I alluded to, the team internally on how we're going to make the most effective use out of the JTC visit that's happening on the Oregon side and the Dalles in September. We think that'll be a combination of some commissioners being present either in their role as a commissioner or for some that hold dual offices in that other role to really build the picture of the full community need for the bridge. We're also hoping, and that's where JLA will be involved, to do some outreach to some of the community members that haven't been involved in many ways, either through comms needs or through the bridge aesthetics committees or other ways of volunteering, to make sure that we have a strong presence from the community and hopefully some organic public comments that are offered there too. On the public information side, in terms of outreach, August kicks up and it's in the packet. Some of the festivals that have been planned. And again, those are always just an opportunity to educate people about where we are in the bridge project and answer any questions they have about the new bridge. You guys should have all received an email, but you can sign up if you are looking at that schedule and there is one of those events that works and you want to come be present at that booth. Please let either Mike or myself or anyone on the comms committee know, and we'll make sure that you're added to that list. The summer newsletter should be coming out in the next few weeks. We're also, as we mentioned at the last one, we've previewed a working version of the tolling webpage that's going to get added over on the authority's site, but can cross-link over from the project page. And the goal there is we're really digging into the tolling thing is to just build up that record of explaining to people how tolling works in terms of setting the policies and those different factors, which we've now gone through a couple times that people need to be aware of that are taken into account as we set those policies. Looking ahead to the fall, we do have some open house opportunities that we're turning. One of those is an online open house, and that will be supporting the Bridge Aesthetics Committee work. And then a second one later in the fall, ideally will be in person, and that'll be about the bike ped access opportunities. And a lot of that is still right now aiming to be in coordination with when the raise work gets underway. And then I will say, just looking ahead, some of the stuff we're working on internally is revisiting some of the key messages on this project as we move further into this phase of the design and planning, anticipating that in coordination with the engineering and construction committee, as they reach future milestones, we're probably going to revise some of the ways that we're talking about where we are in the project and what the project looks like going forward. So just making sure that some of the messaging that we've been pretty consistent in repeating for the last couple of years as we grow with the project, that messaging grows too. So those are kind of the main areas we're working on.
Questions? Thank you. Okay, we'll move on. Action items, invoice policy.
Yeah, so this policy we established, and really what we needed was something that was outward facing to say that the authority had adopted what some of the procedures that we're developing as part of the project. So this policy, he drafted up, and if you've got specific questions, we can refer back. But it's just really capturing those in a policy. There will be a procedure that follows with some workflows. But it gives us something to refer to when FHWA or other outside agencies are asking how you do something. We can say, here's our policy on how we're doing it. So.
Everybody had a chance to review it? Any concerns or questions? Hearing done, I entertain a motion.
I did have one question. In the kind of flow of invoices, it talks about approvals by all the different groups. Are they approvals or recommendations?
Recommendations for approval. The only actual group that has approval authority is the commission
authority. Yeah, and so that might want to be clarified in each of those. Because there's 3 or 4 different.
Yeah, is it a review or is it approved?
Yeah, it's really approval to move to the next step, not approval of the actual. So we'll clarify that.
I thought you did a nice job on it.
Like that was clear, different types of contracts that come in, how they're gonna be paid, and then who's gonna have approvals. It was really clear.
Okay, would anybody like to make a motion with minor change edits?
Move to approve the invoicing policy with the edits to clarify approval for progress rather than approval of the invoice.
I would second.
There is a motion and a second, even though I don't think you can second the motion.
I will second.
There's a second. All right. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Right, the amendment to the CFA.
This is really just to identify the purpose of the Bridge Authority and make it a signal purpose entity, and references back to some of the things about switching it from a board to a commission. So that's really what it was for.
So this has to be sent to the counties, or how does this work?
It's Mark. I don't think Mark's on. I don't know if there's a process where we have to go back and send it to anyone. I will follow up with Mark on that.
Okay, thanks. I would expect it does have to go to the counties, but
probably for the records, I would say we can do that.
There was one verbiage that I noticed, paragraph 6.1. It says objects. I thought it should be objectives. It's in paragraph 6.1.
You're in the full document.
Yeah.
Sorry, where was it at again?
The signature page also has the members of the bi-state.
That's signed that. Those.
Yeah, the original was signed by the bi-state work group. Does that group then need to change?
That's right. We have to Mark Charles how to do this.
A year or something.
We need to see Mark's instructions on how to do this.
Yeah, I would imagine now it's the chairs or.
You see that word there.
I'll check with that.
But do you want us to approve from an authority point of view, making this change, and then you and Mark decide how far back you go?
Why don't we just wait until you get a legal explanation of how we have to do this? It doesn't sound like a lot of point to doing it if we don't have the authority to do it.
We'll bring it back to you.
There's no real rush, right?
Okay. All right, we'll bring it back.
Okay.
You just can't check it off this list.
Informational items, Mark has followed up with the county attorneys. They're still working through the Hood River County loan. The training session for right away, there was like 3 or 4 people that had requested it. We're just gonna see if we can get a PowerPoint together that we can send to those 4. And if there's specific questions, then we can address it with those individual people rather than doing like a training. So we figured that was just more efficient for everybody to do that, if that's all right.
Who was it for? I know I was.
And Catherine.
Okay.
We could do it
Right away.
Yeah. So if you got interest, I mean, we can.
I'd add me to that list.
Okay.
Yeah, send if you're just gonna build.
Yep. Okay, we'll do that. And then Bridge Aesthetics Committee, Eric, I don't know if there was any other additional updates from the Bridge Aesthetics.
No, we've got comments. I talked to Jason today and he's incorporating those into the draft. He said there were a couple that came through that seemed to be very strongly worded. And he's not sure how to deal with those. And he said he'd share something with me later on today. So we'll see.
So are you still trying to issue a report by the end of August?
Yeah. I think it's August 29th.
Okay.
And it's in August is really, it's like 3 different running reviews to make sure. So
it is, there is a document that you're working with that is
99% there.
Yes.
Yeah. What I'm worried about is the trash. Are you involved in that as well, going through?
On the Thursday, we have the meetings that involvement has been sporadic, would be generous term.
From exterior, from the tribes.
Right.
Okay,
We've been attending, but.
Yeah, so in your report, assuming that the tribes are still messing around with it, are you gonna close your report off and have a section that says you've met 5 times with the tribes to show that there was opportunity for input?
We could do something like that. Yeah.
I think you need to think about that.
And I think Roy believes that the meetings with the tribes will continue to move along.
I know
for how long, but
I'm gonna die in 19, when I'm 80 years old too. I'd like to see a bridge.
Yep. No, that's a good suggestion.
We had this many opportunities to meet.
Yeah, that's what I'm after.
One little.
Yep.
Not that you're supposed to use ChatGPT, but let me tell you, if I can write something great to show like there was the opportunity there. But we are talking at every tribal meeting. We do bring up the opportunity to go to, and Roy brings up every time. So it's definitely being.
I just don't want it to slide by the end of August and they're not done. I think.
Well, our intent is to issue it in August and allow those to continue if they do. Roy is very clear that his group does any of the reconciliation between the ideas presented there and the ideas that he's discussing from the tribes.
The other thing I would request is that at your due date, you make reference, as of this date, we've met 6 times with the tribes with this input. And then don't make any, hey, we think they're done, we're not done, just a statement of fact. And keep going.
Anything else for Bridge Aesthetics? Do you want to touch on any upcoming action items? adjustments. Yep.
One correction here, the procurement and the procurement policy and the retention, record retention policy are to be presented on August 12th meeting. But I don't think we can do the procurement policy on that meeting, so we'll provide the record retention policy to the governance committee day. And we can,
on Wednesday?
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
today, and then we can discuss on Wednesday meeting. The procurement policy will be delayed about another couple of months. It's massive, so.
And I did learn that Hood River County is just about to start a review of the procurement policy to change all of their policies, knowing that they're quite antiquated. So your appraisal is correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Roundtable, anything else from board members? I know we blew through a lot of stuff real fast there. Anything else online? Seeing none, everybody has a list of the events. Please email if you can make it. Our next meeting will be Monday, August 12th, from 2 to 4 here and online. If there's nothing else for the good of the order, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all.
On time. Early.